This is the Modern Architect radio show and podcast. The Modern Architect features one-on-one interviews with renowned and cutting-edge architects, influencers, and sustainability leaders. Our show informs and illuminates the transformation that architecture brings to our cities, communities, and lives. And now, introducing the host of The Modern Architect, Tom Dioro.
Our guest today we're honored to have is Alvin Huang, architect and NOMA member. Alvin is a Los Angeles-based architect with a global profile. He's an award-winning architect, designer, and educator who explores the intersections between technology and culture to produce innovative design work that challenges convention and expresses universal values. He's also the founder and principal of Synthesis Design and Architecture and an associate professor at the University of Southern California, where he's also the director of graduate and post-professional architecture. Prior to establishing SDA, Alvin gained significant experience working in the offices of Zaha Hadid Architects, Future Systems, and AECOM. He received a Master of Architecture from the Graduate Design Research Laboratory at the Architectural Association in London and a Bachelor of Arts from the USC School of Architecture in Los Angeles. For more information, feel free to visit his website at synthesis-dna.com. Again, synthesis-dna.com.
Today's episode is made possible by Swatchbox, the leading sample platform for architects and designers. Swatchbox brings thousands of product samples from the world's leading manufacturers into one platform. Browse materials for inspiration, create custom collections, then request your samples for free with automatic next day or second day shipping. Get started at swatchbox.com.
Alvin, we're really honored to have you on the show today. Thank you very much. Excited to talk to you as well.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Alvin, I'm curious, the name Synthesis DNA. How did you arrive at that?
It took a lot of thought, to be honest. When I started my practice in 2000, at that time it was 2011, I was thinking about how to name the practice and really was thinking about it a lot. And I think one of the things that struck me was that I had worked previously for Zaha Hadid Architects, and then I moved to Future Systems Architects afterwards. And then while I was at Future Systems, it transitioned into becoming Amanda Levitt Architects, where one of the principals, the two principals split and left the name Future Systems, and one of the principals changed the name to her name and appointed me a director of ALA, Amanda Levitt Architects. And I remember one of the things that I personally remember feeling at that time was that I actually felt more agency and more ownership of the firm when it was Future Systems versus when it was ALA, even though I was now a director of ALA. And simply, obviously my role increased, but let's say the kind of belonging to an organization that had somebody else's name on it made it still, even though I was a director in that organization, made me feel like it was still someone else's name. And so when it came time to start my own firm, I wanted to make sure that one of the things I feel very strongly about is about studio culture and practice culture and getting buy-in and ownership from a collective to produce great design work. And the best design projects I've been involved in have all happened when we've had the best studio culture and kind of commitment collectively. And I think that was something that was important to me when choosing a name that wasn't my name. And then the name Synthesis, the DNA is design and architecture. So it's actually not, the scientific term, but the SDA, Synthesis Design and Architecture, was, I wanted a single word, but one that could be converted into an acronym later. And so I was very interested in one of my mentors, Tom Main, and what he did with Morphosis and, that kind of single word name. But at that time was also chasing a lot of work in China. And my father told me, in China, they don't know the word synthesis and it won't mean anything and they'll forget it and they'll mispronounce it. But if you have an acronym, nobody knows who. Chinese people don't care who Skidmore, Owings, or Merrill are, but they all know SOM. And they can pronounce letters. And so synthesis as the word, meaning something that is what I believe firmly about in architecture, which is the coming together of a lot of parts, whether those are conceptual parts or physical parts, or ideological parts into one coherent whole thing, is really what I feel architecture is. And that was the singular word. And then design and architecture was the opportunity to convert it into an acronym, SDA.
Excellent. Now, agency. Share with us a bit about agency and why that really mattered so much to you.
Well, I think agency is something that is really, really important in design, not only from the culture of an office, but the sort of intentions of a project and the kind of authorship of the architect, in terms of not only having the ability to work on something, but the, let's say, ability to feel ownership and to with that ownership comes an obligation and an intentionality in terms of, let's say, one of the things I'm really been chewing on a lot lately, particularly my role as the director of graduate architecture at USC, is defining architecture as the materialization and interrogation of our value systems into the built environment. And when we have agency, then we can really think about our value systems and what we value and what our clients value and what our stakeholders value and what the communities that we are building within value, and how we can put those things into material form to really influence the built environment and represent the built environment as something that actually exhibits the qualities and expresses the things that we value.
Is there a formal process that you have, or even a mental one, that takes the values and turns them into something tangible?
I wouldn't say there's a system or a rule of thumb or a kind of formula for that on my end. I think it's more of a constant interrogation about, what those values are. I think one of the things that is important to me is an assessment of a question, like a kind of driving question that will motivate every project in terms of, I think one of the most important things I like to say is that the client will provide the generic question or the generic problem. And then my job is to find the specific question within that, right? And so the more generic question might be, I need an office building of X thousand square feet that has this many rooms and has this much conference space, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And my job then is to interrogate that client to really try to understand what are the values that they represent, not only as an outward facing organization to the general public, but as an inward facing institution that has to deal with certain ways of working, and that those types of things allow me to ask questions that might say, well, is this enough? Can we design an office building that is, let's say, more like a landscape or more like a series of gardens or whatever it is? I'm just kind of randomly coming up with things, but I'm randomly coming up with things that we've used in previous projects. But that essentially that there is ways to reframe the question to be more specific, and let's say specific to a particular client or specific to a particular site or specific to a particular context. And context, I think, is an important one to think of, that is not only physical, but is also political, economical, and reaction to, the context of the world that we live in.
Wow. Listening to the Modern Architect podcast at KZSU Stanford 90.1 FM. We're talking today with Alvin Huang, architect, founder, and principal of Synthesis Design and Architecture, and an associate professor at the University of Southern California, where he's also director of graduate and post-professional architecture. For more information, feel free to visit the website of synthesis-dna.com. Again, synthesis-dna.com. Alvin, I was asking, how do you, again, to get that capture the essence of what the owner or your client is looking for?
Well, I think one of the things that has come up repeatedly for us and maybe has become the sort of typology that we specialize in, we're a firm that, unlike others, almost every time we do a project, it seems to be the first we do of that type. We have done retail projects, hospitality projects, civic projects, public art, commercial projects, cultural projects, and we don't have a kind of deep reservoir of specialization in one single project type, meaning we don't have, which is a problem for us with RFQs and RFPs, where oftentimes, the first question is, how many of these have you designed and built in the last 3 years on time and on budget? And our answer is usually 0. But what we consistently do is we get hired by clients who have a brand or an identity for an organization or a company that they're trying to rethink, and that they allow us to be part of that rethinking process in terms of trying to re-identify what that brand is and how it wants to be represented in the physical world, and what that representation communicates to the rest of the world, and what that communicates to the people that are occupying that space and using that space. And so maybe as a recent example, I would say we just completed a couple of years ago a office space for a pediatric neurologist in Orange County. And she's a doctor who had an existing practice and wanted to get out of something that was a very conventional medical office, and something that I would say all of us are very familiar with in terms of, what the typical dentist or office, small clinic looks like. And reception desk in the front, and a, very kind of almost domestic like reception area. And then a corridor, a double loaded corridor with, exam rooms on either side, and very much a kind of bottleneck condition of moving in and out. And we redesigned it to begin thinking about her practice as something that was a little bit more lounge-like rather than clinical, but also that really played with 3 things. It was geometry, color, and texture in the way things were materialized, as those are the 3 stimuli, tactile stimuli, that really can connect with children who suffer from neurological disorders. And so what we wanted to do was make the space a place that when the children came there, it wasn't just the utility of the visit in terms of what they got out of the doctor, but it was also something that they were able to enjoy the space as children climbed. We did a bunch of built-in seating that was folded geometries with acoustic felt, with CNC milled patterns that was very tactile, that the children could climb, that they could lounge in, that they could sit in. We had a sort of lounge reception. So now the bulk of the footprint is actually the waiting area, which we don't call a waiting area, we call a lounge. And there's a corridor in the back, which would be for the doctors and her staff to access the exam rooms, which are sandwiched between that waiting area and that corridor. And what that then did is it allowed the doctors to move back and forth from exam room to exam room in privacy. And essentially we have 2 circulations, the lounge area circulation for the clients and the patients, and then a more utilitarian corridor in the back for the doctors, which meant there was no longer the bottleneck Like people could move in and out of those exam rooms at will without clogging up that corridor. But then it also meant that the doctors can move from exam room to exam room without getting flagged down by people waiting in exam rooms that would see them passing by in that corridor. And so there was a sort of double purpose of, let's say, identifying the sort of essence of what that doctor was doing and how it could address the needs of her clients and her patients, but also how we could streamline and make their own internal processes more efficient and more effective.
That brand and identity, I heard that a couple of times from you. Your website, I brought this up. I'm noticing is that it's like you're a brand as well. Even though obviously you're an architecture firm, I don't think a lot of architecture firms think of themselves as a brand. What's your thoughts on that?
I guess that is one thing that is important to me, is that I think, as a design firm that, has a particular niche, I think one of the things that I've thought about a lot, particularly as it relates to my own work, but also my academic profile as well, has been about maybe brand is one way to look at it, but another is profile, in terms of like what makes you stand out, and why would people choose you over other people that do the same thing that you do. And I think that's one thing I try to convey as a firm, but also as an academic that has a research profile. One of the things that I always talk about is if a lot of my academic interests historically have related towards design computation and digital fabrication, and a lot of technological kind of processes that we use within the office and that we use within the work and that I use within my research. But then when you get to saying that, okay, if that's the domain that I work in and that's how I define myself, what happens when I show up at Acadia? Acadia is the Association of Computer-Aided Design and Architecture. At that particular conference, when I'm in that space, I can't say that I'm the guy that's interested in design computation and digital fabrication anymore, because that's the whole room. So how do you carve out a space there that starts to become more specific towards yourself? And I think that's one of the things that I like to think about as a practitioner, is that what I do as a practitioner is a service, but it is also a trust me service, not a tell me what to do service, for lack of a better term. And I think that's one of the things that I always try to say, is like, when I have the first initial sit down with clients, particularly those that are, let's say, not as well versed with architectural processes or hiring architects, is that I want to make sure they're hiring me for the right reason, and that I'm choosing them for the right reason. Like, it has to be mutually beneficial, and I don't want them to expect something that they're not going to get, and I don't want to give them something, or I don't want to, work with people that I don't align with my own views. And I think one of those things there is beginning to think about, like, I always talk to them about the difference between a stylist and a barber. And like a barber, you walk into and you sit down and you oftentimes show them a picture and you go, this is how I want my haircut. I don't know how to cut it, but you do. This is how I want it. And then the barber will cut your hair. Whereas the stylist, you go in, you sit down and you say, these are the things I like. I want you to take a look at my hair. The stylist will say, well, based off of your hair texture and the hair color, the shape of your face, the complexion of your skin, things that are trending right now, why don't we do this? Or why don't we do that? And there is not a, trust me, I just do what I want. You have to live with it. But there is a collaborative process of trying to move through that space together. And I think that's one of the things that's important to me with the brand, is that by having a more distinct brand identity, you attract the clients that want what you do more than just so I do anything and everything, and you can hire me for whatever you want. I think one of the more clever versions I've seen is I'm good friends with the ladies from Design Bitches, and I don't know if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
But they're a great firm here in LA. The title of the firm is Design Bitches, Design, Bitches, which they got that name because they actually entered a competition here in Los Angeles many years ago by the AIA Los Angeles, and I think the title of the competition was like, "What is design?" or "What is architecture?" And their entry was called "It's Design, Bitches." And that ended up spearheading their firm, and they do a lot of funky, very kind of bohemian, modernist architecture. Really, really great stuff. A lot of fun graphics, very pop. And what I've found for them is that name, Design Bitches, helps them filter and identify the right clients automatically, right? Because obviously a name like Design Bitches turns some people off. But with others, it might turn them on, right? I mean, it's actually something where they're like, oh, I want to work with somebody that has that spunk or positioning. And so I think the branding is about helping you identify yourself so that other people can identify you as somebody that that aligns with what they're looking for.
Outstanding. This is The Modern Architect on KZSU, Stanford 90.1 FM. We're talking today with Alvin Huang, founder and principal of Synthesis Design and Architecture, as well as an associate professor at the University of Southern California. Our public service acknowledgments today are two of them. The first one is Stand With Asians. Stand With Asians was formed in February 2021 during the wave of Asian hate crimes that swept across America. One of the co-founders of Stand With Asians learned that his friend was the victim of a brutal stabbing in Manhattan, Chinatown. Starting with a blog post, friends, allies, and strangers rallied to form the Stand With Asians movement. Less than a month later, on March 26, they launched the March 26 awareness campaign. This volunteer group worked so well together with so little central coordination that they began to think about how to make a long-term impact together for the AAPI community. For more information, feel free to visit standwithasians.com. Again, that's standwithasians.com. And our second public service acknowledgement is for the Chinese Chamber of Commerce. The Chinese Chamber of Commerce of Los Angeles is an organization that was formed, it's one of the oldest and the largest business associations in the greater Los Angeles area. It's a 501c6 tax-exempt nonprofit organization that's been leading and serving business communities since 1955. The Chinese Chamber promotes the interests of their member companies by encouraging trade, business growth, and new opportunities. For more information, feel free to visit their website at lachinesechamber.org. Again, we're talking today with Alvin Huang. Alvin, how and why do those organizations matter and mean much to you?
Well, I'm on the board of directors for the Chinese Chamber of Commerce of Los Angeles, and it's a member organization that deals with local small businesses here in Los Angeles that are operating within the Chinese American community. I'm Chinese American myself, and it's been a very big, large, well, I'd say historically, it's been a part of my culture that I've probably tried to not center myself around. I never wanted to be the Asian architect. I always just wanted to be the architect. But I think more recently, particularly with a lot of the anti-Asian violence that's been happening around the country, it's a role that I've started to claim and started to put more towards the center. And then Stand With Asians is an organization that I began working and supporting with in collaboration with the Chinese Chamber that was founded by one of my good friends, Mark Young, in San Francisco, and is now a national organization that is hosting a series of workshops and fundraisers for and micro grants that support Asian American nonprofits around the country that are dealing with different ways of addressing the kind of wave of anti-Asian violence that's happening around the country and isn't getting the, let's say, visibility that we think it deserves.
Excellent. Alvin, if you can go back as far as you can, what made you decide to be an architect or in design?
I mean, I could, easily go down the route that most people do, which is saying I played a lot with Legos when I was a kid, which I did, but that really wasn't it. My father has a degree in architecture, which was a big influence. He never practiced architecture. He practiced adjacent. He worked in construction as a general contractor and then later as a real estate developer. And that would be where I got my interest in, I'd say, buildings. And I would say I'd make a very clear distinction between an interest in buildings and an interest in architecture. I think the interest in architecture happened later, even probably after I graduated with a degree in architecture. When I graduated with the undergrad degree in architecture, which I kind of randomly chose because I knew I liked to design and be creative and didn't know what else to study. So I chose architecture and happened to be quite good at it when I was in school in undergrad, and then went down the route of working for, a fairly large corporate firm. But I would say it wasn't my interest in architecture. Architecture, I think, really blossomed when I got my first chance to really be engaged in the design process in something that got built, and realizing that the kind of fulfillment and satisfaction I got out of that process was extremely high. But I was interested in it in a way that, let's say, I was interested in that fulfillment and satisfaction of what that process did, but maybe not so much in the product that I had just produced. Right? Like it was not a knock on traditional corporate architecture, but me realizing at that time that I had an interest in working on things that were a bit more progressive and more avant-garde. And that I would say the thing that I feel like distinguishes buildings from architecture are their relationship to the discipline. And when I say relationship to the discipline, I mean that each project has the potential or the opportunity to participate in a larger conversation, about a larger discourse about what architecture is and what architecture has been and what architecture will be, much the way art does. And I think buildings all require that things are technically sound, that they're produced professionally, that they meet code, that they have structural requirements, that they have ADA requirements, all the things that we need to learn and do as architects. But we also know that 85% of the built environment around us is actually not designed by architects, and they have all those same things. Right? They actually meet code, are weatherproofed. They work. And then I think what separates architecture from building is when they start to engage that disciplinary history and that disciplinary future in terms of their relationship to the field of architecture. And I would say that that's in some ways maybe a parallel you'll be thinking about the work of Duchamp, the artist. The urinals that he placed in galleries by themselves, you can't call art. Right? They're just urinals. But the intentionality of placing them in the galleries and the discursive ideas about how they were placed in context to a larger history of contemporary art and the reactions he was intending to provoke from the viewers are part of a conversation that make them art, where they on themselves are not. And I think that's an important part of what makes architecture versus buildings, is the ability for us as architects, like artists or like filmmakers, to identify how our buildings are designed with intentionality in respect to other conversations within architecture.
Alvin, it's been a real honor and pleasure having you as our guest today. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you being here. It was terrific.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Alvin. You've been listening to The Modern Architect. I'm Tom Dioro. Our guest today has been Alvin Huang, the founder and principal of Synthesis Design and Architecture, and an associate professor at the University of Southern California, where he is also the director of graduate and post-professional architecture. For more information, feel free to visit synthesis-dna.com. Again, that's synthesis-dna.com. Join us again next time when we welcome another outstanding architect, engineer, influencer, or civic leader committed to positive, sustainable, and beautiful cities, communities, and lives. Thank you for listening.
Today's episode is made possible by Swatchbox, the leading sample platform for architects and designers. Swatchbox brings thousands of product samples from the world's leading manufacturers into one platform. Browse materials for inspiration, create custom collections, then request your samples for free with automatic next day or second day shipping. Get started at swatchbox.com.